Welcome to another edition of Influence, the global podcast that shines a spotlight on the influencer marketing industry. My name is Gordon Glenister. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm a keynote speaker, trainer and consultant in the sector and published author on influencer marketing strategy. Influence is also a proud member of the Marketing Podcast Network, where you can listen to other amazing influencer and marketing related shows. But before we get started, please don't forget to subscribe to the show just to make sure that you don't miss a future episode. Now, today I'm talking with Michael Forrest, who is the founder of Squares.tv, and we're chatting all about live stream video techniques. Welcome, Michael, to the show. So welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast. And I'm super delighted to have Michael Forrest with me today from Squares.tv. And I met Michael at the photography and video show, and there were so many exhibition stands there. It was like, wow, this is like an explosion of content. And Michael had this lovely little stand there, and I was just, you know what it's like when you meet somebody and they really sort of stand out. And we had such a great conversation, and I thought, do you know what, this would be a great guest for my podcast and video, because I know this is going to be a little bit about some visual display. But anyway, a warm welcome to you, Michael. Lovely to see you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Gordon, and being so nice about my very scruffy little stand that I had at the conference. It was all very last minute, a few sort of A3 printouts up on the wall. I was changing every day to try and make sure people knew what I was actually doing. And hopefully I can be a bit more clear than I was at the conference.
But you stood out, you know, something that caused me to have a conversation with you here, and that's how things happen, isn't it, really? And in this world of the attention economy, we have to find ways in which we can appeal to people, not just like in-your-face advertising, but something that actually says, yeah, I like that. That's a really good idea. So we're going to talk about techniques in photography, video, iPhone, and just so tell me a little bit about Squares TV.
Yeah. So I've got a few little slidelets, so I'll bring those up. So my name's Michael Forrest, and my company is Good to Hear Limited, and then Squares TV is my sort of offshoot that's all about audio visual production, live streaming, all of that kind of sort of influencer type stuff that we want to talk about. And I'm talking about editless podcasting, editless video production, standing out on Zoom and Teams, live streaming, producing online demos, and then teaching tools is quite a big thing. And OBS and Ecamm Live are some really good bits of software that are designed for live streaming, but once you start using them for your content production, just really unlock this sort of live, real-time way of kind of sort of presenting content in a way that is a bit less, it's much easier to do, and it's a lot more direct. And then I'm a programmer. So I try and sort of like, I start my YouTube channel, I start this, and then I start going, oh, if there was a tool that let me do this, I'd be so much more efficient. And then I start making the tools, and then my YouTube channel suffers a bit. But now I've got these apps out. So my main apps are Shoot Pro Webcam, which is a camera for iPhone that lets you use your phone as a camera. Also a telestrator, which means you can draw on top of that video footage in real time, and then a teleprompter as well. So I have these workflows for letting you, that combines with BeatSheet, that lets you run and plan videos and live streams in a way that sort of like helps you to be a presenter and also the sort of live producer at the same time.
Cool.
And that's really good for also a sort of content production. I make all my videos using this combination of things now. So I have my teleprompter set up, and I sort of spin through it and just do a live recording. And then the last thing that I'm working on is called Video Pencil, and that just lets you kind of draw and annotate whatever live feed you have to use. And then just to give you a bit more context, it's not the only stuff I've made. Squares TV has some other tools, a delay calculator, a sort of platform for helping you get tips to fix your video, DJ stuff. I've got some musician stuff. I've also got some sort of mental health and productivity tools that I've released over the years before I discovered this niche of AV. And then I'm a musician as well, so I have a whole YouTube channel I have releases on.
Oh my God. And for those of you that are literally not watching this but hearing it, suddenly we've got a whole load of apps that have come on your screen.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd sort of do that, but just we can talk about these are the main three things that I'm working on, but that's all sort of comes under the mantle of Squares TV. So
Yeah.
that's all my little slides for today. But I just thought I like to give people a bit of context to who I am, because I
Yeah.
sort of zone in on some things when I find that people are interested. But I've tried so many other things, and I thought,
Well, I think that's a really important point actually, because you can be overwhelmed. I mean, particularly when it comes to editing apps, they're all trying to promote to us as content creators all of the time, and then you think, well, which one should I be using? Because there's so much choice out there. So if we just talk about okay, let's just talk about me, for example, as a
hmm,
content creator in my own right, and often using educational. And as it happens this afternoon, I am going to do some, do some videoing for one of my email campaigns and stuff like that. So, if I didn't know you, I didn't know where would I start? Where would I
um,
start?
well, I mean, I think the best way to start with this stuff is to get comfortable on camera. You do need to be sort of recording your takes. You have a script like that. That's really important. Like a lot of people just think they can come in and wing it, and if you come in with no sort of script or any kind of structure, it can be very rambling. It can be a bit loose. So the first thing I recommend to people is actually like figure out how to like just learn the basics of script writing. Okay, you have an
Mm,
action, you have what you're going to say, and do a couple of drafts of that. And for me, that's the really a core part that kind of it transformed my workflow. From I'd have an idea for a video, I'd record it, but I'd have so much footage and content that it could take me weeks to edit that into something coherent. And when I flipped that around and started writing a proper script to start with, I knew exactly what content I needed. I was able to just record the stuff I needed and put it together in an own order. And you still edit and you tweak and you iterate and you discover things along the way, but it's just it's so much better to write something and edit that text than to be stuck with a load of video that you sort of have missing bits and then you can't match the footage and all that
absolutely.
complexity.
Although I would say though that you do notice that some people that are so focused on the script, you could almost see their eyes moving, and you know that it doesn't feel authentic and genuine. And one of the things I've noticed in the influencer space, among particularly some of the young content creators that are unscripted, somehow they just feel real, Whereas I think people that are more established that are nervous about the camera, they rely too heavily on the script and they can't bring it to life through rise and fall tone. And because there's one thing having a pitch that's a script, but there's another thing actually being able to deliver it, isn't there?
Yeah, and it comes down to expertise and experience, really. Like to start off with, you might be a bit nervous on camera, and it's really obvious that you're reading through your script, and say you wrote the script, but you never said it as you were writing it, and then it's all unnaturally worded, and it's quite difficult to get through. Um, so really, obviously, the gold standard is I have come up with a few really choice, concise, clear phrases that I'm going to use as part of this video, but I'm a bit loose with it. And I can just sort of like I know but it just helps sort of reduce that mental overhead if you have something to reference that you have sculpted a little bit, but then around that you can be a bit more loose. And that's why I love recording things live as well, because you're just doing it in one take. You're able to kind of bring in those bits that you have you sculpted a little bit more carefully, but then you can go off on a little tangent. You can just have a thought as you go, and then that just lends what you're talking about, which is that sort of like the naturalness, the authenticity that you're talking about, I think. But
Yeah.
honestly, it's a lot of it is just practice.
Yeah,
It's
no,
just
I,
doing
I,
it.
I, I absolutely subscribe to that. And it's some really good points because I think I've been using some videos before to promote like a speaker session. And I know that if I don't have some form of bullet points or script, I'm going to miss the call to actions, or I've got to have a certain flow, which is, create the pain point or the real need, and then the solution, and then the call to action. It's almost as you rightly say, it's a flow. So that's really interesting. So what about now? I know, what amazes me when you see, for example, BBC News or any news channel. You often see lots of cutaways, and you see the presenters like a third, like we're seeing the Ukraine, for example. You'll often see the reporters on the one side, and so that the viewer can really get a sense of the gravitas of what's happening behind them. So I guess our attention spans are dropping hugely, aren't they? So we want entertaining mix of content. What's your thoughts about how we do that on iPhone?
I think the idea that our attention spans is dropping is sort of the wrong way to look at it. It's just there's so much competing for our attention in any one moment
Right,
that if
good
something
point.
isn't engaging, then
Yeah,
something else is going to pull your attention away.
of
If
course.
you only had the paper, then you just sort of get through it because there's nothing else around. But it's not that we're short. It's just there's a lot of competition for that attention, and that is one of the most valuable resources to the everything like the way businesses are run now. Attention is so important. But in terms of sort of producing that, and this is what this so I like to, if you do plan something a little bit ahead, you can do a live recording, you can bring in those interesting elements as you go, you can bring in the b-roll, um, but unlike if it was something edited, you would actually be able to react to that and comment on the content of that in a way that is quite immersive, in a way that you can't when you're editing live.
Mm,
um, but yeah, obviously those BBC productions, they're huge crews. There's
of
an awful
course,
lot of planning. There's
of
an
course.
awful lot of equipment. There's an awful lot of things plugged into other things and satellite dishes. And honestly, like I find that when I watch like the BBC now or the reality, because I watch a lot of YouTube, like I get a lot of what I want, because there's sort of I find it so overproduced
Mm,
now, like the level that bar that these big the sort of traditional media companies will go to. It's impressive, it's flawless. They'll have all these beautiful camera shots, b-roll, all these things, but you think actually like you're sort of almost starting to dilute the information now because you've got so much stuff that's sort of kind of tangential to the message. Sometimes I do just want to hear someone who is an expert talking uninterrupted for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, for an hour.
no, no,
And
maybe you're
actually,
right. Maybe you're right. Yeah, and it's the authenticity of it and this on the hoof stuff that I think people like. And I have noticed with my videographer, she'll just say when she's going to an event, and I get the feeling that I'm part of her event that she's going to do, like a red carpet event. So it's not just her on the video, it's like some of her stories are about, oh, I saw you were at the event the other day. It looks really cool. It looks fun. So we're getting a bit of an inside shot at it rather than just the static interviews that have been pulled out. So it's an interesting perspective actually.
and I'd also add that I mean, this is why podcasts have become popular because you just get an uninterrupted thing, but also sort of you can go into such a niche much more deeply in a way than sort of mainstream media. Not not to use the term because I know that's been sort of misused in recent years, but I find that there's so much more scope for very, very niche content now and going into a lot of depth on that. And that one of the biggest mistakes I made was continuing to try and appeal to some sort of mainstream market or mainstream audience, or sort of like take off the rough edges of all like the sort of deep nerdy stuff that I like to go into. But I sort of feel, no, we have to polish that all off because we're used to the BBC, we're used to these TV channels where
Mm,
anything that takes any sort of prior knowledge is kind of rubbed off, so you have this sort of perfect soundbite. Like now I think people are really searching out that super niche content, that super niche
definitely.
information that they can really dive and get really well produced content in those
Mm,
niches in a way that has never for history, unless you had a really good teacher that happened to be interested in one thing. Now you can find a really good teacher of that really specific thing that might even have really well produced videos, really engaging stuff. So I think it's definitely an era for that niche content production, and the more specific you can get,
the better. Yeah,
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 like
yeah.
you can really engage people in
Well,
in
and on that note, what type of video content that you think can work well in those sort of niche spaces? Can you give me some examples, maybe?
I just think anything that helps you teach, anything that helps you, it's the same tools. So you can still learn from cinema, you can still learn from television, you can still learn from other YouTubers, other content creators, but you're just bringing the tools of those productions into your particular niche. So like I think anyone can use a sort of teleprompt, like a little drawing app. So I'm just able to sort of illustrate a point and go, okay, I'm going to set up my camera and do this, and this is how you do this, and then this is how you, I don't know. I'm clarifying
Yeah.
anything, but I think anyone just being able to have a little chalk, it's sort of the new chalkboard. Like if I'm a teacher, I probably want a blackboard so I can draw something up there.
Yes. Yes,
If
yes,
I'm
yes.
maybe, but it's all that
Also,
visual
I guess it
language.
also makes it personal, doesn't it? Because actually, if you're talking about something that, so for example, I host a weekly roundtable event. If one of the members on there was to say raise a question, and I was to explain it by annotating something, and so here's an example of what that might look like over here. It makes it very personal to him, but also it just mixes up what we're used to in a
Hmm.
way that's quite different, isn't it?
And you just it's I mean, a danger for me is I get into my own little world and I'm making my things, and maybe I'm not consuming very much content that other people are doing. But especially with music, I find it very hard to listen to music as a 20 years into my failure as a musician. It's sort of like the bitterness gets a little bit intense for me to listen to it. But certainly I really love like well produced YouTube videos, and I watch enough of those that you just each time you see a new idea, that becomes something new for your arsenal. But and then you shouldn't be sort of trying to force every new thing into your bit of content. But the more you're aware of what's possible, and then you just sort of figure out how to do it. But then, and in the course of explaining something, you go, oh yeah, this would be a really good way to explain this. That's when you bring it in. So,
Mm.
um, I mean, I'm kind of addicted to figuring out how to do stuff, and then maybe I'm not so good at then actually producing a lot of content with that knowledge. I'm so interested in, oh, how has he like managed to draw on top of that? How did he do that fancy slide deck where it was overlaid over himself and all that kind of thing? So I'll figure out how to do it, and then I'll have this huge sort of arsenal of possibilities. But then, at some point you have to go, right, I need to explain what am I actually trying to explain here? And I
Yeah,
realise
well,
that
that's a
your
really
audience kind
important
of
point
knows that
because
already.
you could overcomplicate the technology in such a way that, and I've seen technology also break down online, which can be worse than the delivery and the technology. Because you could have some super cool stuff, say some super cool content, but actually, if you've got something that is getting likely to break down or it's all lost, isn't it? Now, I'm not saying that
Yeah,
we go with
exactly.
the intention of that, but there is an overcomplicated moment that you sometimes have. Now, I noticed that
Yeah,
you also use OBS Studio,
yeah,
don't you?
yeah, yeah.
So that's something that I've got as well upstairs, but really I don't really use it, and I
Mm.
know I probably should. So tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about OBS.
Well, OBS is a tool for live streaming. So I discovered this back in 2015. I was living in Berlin on my own. I'd sort of watched all the TV in the world, and now I was looking for something to keep me company as I was living alone. I discovered Twitch TV and discovered the live streaming world there. And people had green screens. They were playing these games for hours. I was like, this is weirdly high production values. And so I got really interested in that. And then OBS is a free open source piece of software that lets you produce those live streams. So it lets you bring in video sources, either like live camera sources or media, audio. It lets you add overlays. There are whole websites that let you kind of, if someone donates, then it will spin up a thing and show some graphics and play some sound. So OBS is sort of the heart of your production studio, and that's a live thing. And so you have different scenes set up. So you say, okay, I've got my main camera, my introduction. Now I've got my main camera. Now I've got my game or whatever it is. Like whatever you happen to be producing, you can create these different scenes in OBS, and then um, like once you sort of like go down that rabbit hole, there are so many possibilities of things that you can use that software for, because it's all designed around video. And I'd say OBS is it's open source. It's not easy to use. It's not easy to approach. But I do, it's and but if you are a Mac user, then there is a piece of software called Ecamm Live that gives you what OBS gives you, but in a much more approachable, albeit expensive way.
Mm.
So OBS, but OBS has grown so much over the last several years. It just really gives you anything you could think of is possible. It just might be a few weird clicks in order to bring that in. And so I have tools that work with that also to marshal the complexity of OBS. So if I have a production, a podcast or something, I have all these different segments. With OBS, I had all my function keys mapped, or you can get a Stream Deck, which is a thing where you can set up buttons to switch scenes. But Beatsheet is a piece of software I made for the Mac that lets me marshal a production into a sequence of OBS or Ecamm scenes, and then just sort of step linearly through my show. So I'll press the button, I'll press next, and it'll play my title sequence. I'll press next, it'll play sort of the intro with the
I
background, and
mean,
then
it's
we'll step to my
amazing
co-host,
when
and
you
we'll have a chat.
listening to you. I mean, this is like a if you see the stuff on TV and then you see all the credits afterwards, as you rightly said, all the amount of people that work on a TV show, and yet now we're getting to high production value, really, at a fraction of the cost. And that, of
Mm-hmm.
course, is also why brands are thinking these content creators and influencers, particularly those that have got some of the skills that you're identifying,
Mm.
can add so much more to the experience of the viewer. And that's also why their followers have grown so much, because they're providing not only education but real time entertainment as well, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. It's the good ones. And I always think like if you can be funny, that's the best way to get any message across. If you've got a
Yeah,
sense of humor, it's just, and then I think traditional brands have trouble with that, especially when it's sort of done by committee, where you sort of get this watered down stuff that no one finds funny anymore because everyone's kind of like roughed all the edges off. You can get these sort of bold content creators coming up with stuff that you wouldn't be able to get through a committee, but they've tested it. And it's a little bit cynical on, I don't know, like it's, you can sort of, because 1,000 influencers have tested different things and one came across the right formula, and then you just pick that one. It's you know, there's cost to that for people, for that
yeah,
experimentation, but it is an opportunity. It's a true democratization, right? Like anyone can come up with something and try it.
yeah.
um
I
but
certainly
there is a
noticed.
sort of baseline of quality that
Yeah,
it's hard to, that you have to sort of step over to be taken seriously, and that's something that I'm helping people do, like get off that camera, that laptop mic, get people off that, you know, the horrible webcam that is built into even the best Macs, like have these horrible webcams in them, or just like recording stuff with the audio on your phone. It's just, it's hard to take someone seriously if they haven't got those basics of the AV production figured
yeah.
out.
Well, that's a really interesting point you've just made just a moment ago there, because I think, we all want to be taken seriously in the crafts that we're in, and now I think during COVID, people were more receptive to oh, he hasn't got it quite right or she hasn't got it quite right, but now, because the standards are rising all of the time, we're less supportive of stuff that isn't right. Or if you think about a podcast, we don't want to hear crackles because there's so many others that are crackle free. We don't want to hear interruptions or other sorts of things because and again, it could be amazing content, couldn't it, Michael? But the reality is if the sound isn't right or there is something wrong with the visual, um,
It's, you're creating a cognitive overhead for people where now they're trying to decode that sort of noise reduced audio. It makes it hard for them to actually hear what you're saying because they're sort of, their brain is having to do all this extra work to just make out the words. And I had it, I recorded a podcast every week with my friend Vanka for years, and we'd be talking on our nice microphones every week, and then once in a while we'd just do a normal call, like a FaceTime call, and it was just such a different. I was like, I feel like I felt like I couldn't connect with her over that medium now, because it's night and day when you've got that good audio. And I will say, like, audio is, like, I mean, I'm lucky because I've got a background in like audio production anyway, so I had that, and then I figured out the video in more recent years. But that audio component is so fundamental to standing out and being able to communicate clearly, that it's pretty scary, and it's pretty hard to explain sometimes. It can get very expensive, but it's just really important to standing out.
no, no, absolutely.
um
Keen to get a few little nuggets and tips from you from people that could start the transition. And I know you do a course which will certainly leave our viewers behind afterwards, or training and stuff like that. But perhaps if you can share some little snippets of things that people could take away and do right now.
well, I mean, it obviously always depends on what you're doing, but I do have a newsletter which I have a sort of the first 5 things that you need to get for good remote video, like the remote video basics, which it sort of ends up playing to a lot of what we do now. So I say like, the most important thing for that is the first thing is you've got to have a good internet connection. And then if you're trying to communicate, if you're trying to do anything and you're especially if you're live streaming, especially if you're doing Zoom calls and things like that, that internet connection is key. The next thing then is your sound, as I've just been harping on about. The next thing then is your camera, and then that can be a phone camera, and I have a solution for that with my app, and I will say like it does touch on what we were just saying before, but if you have sort of significantly better sort of camera, than, especially assuming people don't notice the audio. They notice if it's bad, they don't notice if it's good. People don't notice the internet connection. They notice if it's bad, but they don't notice if it's good. The camera is the first thing where people will be like, oh, you look crisp and like that looks really nice. People will actually take you more seriously. And in fact, you can end up upstaging you can end up sort of upstaging the boss in a work meeting in a way if your video production is if you've got your thing set up too nicely. So there's some politics to that as well. But that it's sort of like the business suit of the modern world is if you've got that nice clean camera footage, a nice lens, a nice camera, that's that. Then the next thing is you can sort of interchange lighting. So your lighting is something that you want to get figured out, and I recommend as long as you've got an even light coming onto your whole face, ideally in a controlled way, because relying on an outside window can get very, if the sun comes out, you can create a lot of very intense shadows and things like that. So you want that sort of even light on your face, and then you just want to create that bit of contrast between yourself and the backdrop. So that's the sort of background part. So this is, I mean, I feel that this isn't as awesome as I would have hoped, but like these are the very basics of having that. I'm just the very basics of content production, but like I'm sort of feeding this into meetings and all those online things as well. But you see, like now I have my background is quite plain, and that's partly so that I can draw on top of it, and it actually stands out. But with any, it always kind of comes down to that, and you can the way you create that contrast is either it can be light, dark, it can be color differences, it can be gray, saturated or desaturated, it can be how much in focus things are. So if you can rotate your camera and have a lot of depth behind you, then you can create that sort of blurred background effect. And that actually, I heard a sort of director talking about, like, for a really great shot, like you just want that depth into the background that's going to look really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's the sort of basics of just, and then but then there's so many things you can do. So I mean, I can list off a few things that I love a teleprompter, because I'm able to, so I've currently got you in a teleprompter. So I'm looking through you on Zoom into my camera lens. So I'm maintaining this eye contact for the whole call without, and also being able to use my good camera. I mean, I could do it more or less if it was on the laptop, but then I wouldn't be able to use my good camera. So I love a teleprompter, not just for reading out a script, but also for being able to connect with who I'm talking to.
It's really important, isn't it? Because no, Karen,
yeah.
sorry.
No, go on.
I was just saying on a laptop, if you haven't got a teleprompter into your phone or sequence, because also it's about making sure that you've got the right flow. There's nothing worse than it moving too quickly and you're trying to chase up with it. So getting the right speed of teleprompter is important. And you're absolutely right about eye contact. I know that even when I did a course over in Brazil a little while ago, I had my laptop there. They didn't have a teleprompter in place there. I was using quite a lot of my laptop as ideas, and of course I would look down every now and again, and you're very aware of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it took me a long time to realize that eye contact with the camera was so key. Like I don't have any training. I've never done this, but I'd made so many videos where I'd like, oh, maybe if I'm looking off to the side and talking to someone, but it's like obviously you don't want to be like creepily staring into the lens, but like that is always has to be your point of reference. And you have to, what did someone say, like you have to talk to the camera as though it's someone who you really love, or who really loves you, someone who really likes you. Like talk to the camera as though you're talking, making eye contact with someone that really likes you, and so much can come through that way.
Yeah.
um Another thing I'd say is like something that was really important for me was, I did start when I first started podcasting. I edited that, and I edited that thing down to the wire, like every and every sound, and it took a while for me and Vanka to both sort of find our voice, create, to sort of develop that skill, to become comfortable with our voices, to become comfortable with our opinions on things. And so having that little bit of a buffer where I can edit, it meant that I was able to start to sort of get to know who I am. But then, as you know, 2 years in, we just started recording them live. Well, we started doing video recordings, but yeah, after a while, I actually sort of got rid of the whole editing process. We just did it live. We wouldn't have been able to do that to start with, because we wouldn't have had the experience. We wouldn't have been able to sort of keep that thing going. But so sometimes, so I think like the editing thing is, it's a really good way to ease yourself in.
Yeah.
Because you know
It's
it can
interesting
be
you
really
say,
weird to hear your
it's
voice.
interesting you say that. So you did the podcast live.
Yeah, we started just doing it live. And actually, we broadcast it live on Twitch. And that, honestly, like I was editing for, I mean, even when I got really good at it, and trust me, like I made tools that allowed me to write my notes and then do that, and it would automatically give me the timeline. Even then it could take me hours every week to edit that one podcast. And it was such a time sink. And then I said, I really want to try doing this live. It was a bit risky. It was a bit, you can't sort of optimize that audio quality in the same way, and you can't quite put the perfect track at you, because I had all these music breaks, and you can't quite get the perfect track. But I came up with something in OBS that let me, I do a bit of preparation rather than sort of doing it all after the fact. And I just saved myself a day a week suddenly, of not having to worry about it all weekend, of not having to sort of edit it on Monday and sort of release it on Tuesday. And it was the most freeing thing I've ever done, like with that podcast, was to
And
switch
how did
over
that
to a live.
impact on your audience in terms
I,
of, presumably because you had an audience before, um, and now you're shifting them to, although of course I guess because it's been live, it's still recorded, so
yeah,
you've
yeah,
still got the
exactly.
opportunity. So you've got a double whammy
Yeah,
of
yeah.
picking up different
We
audiences.
Yeah, yeah, and we never really migrated. Honestly, it wasn't a very successful podcast. We recorded 200 episodes. We got a lot out of it, but I think it was the opposite of finding a niche. It was Michael and Ivanka's grand podcast. So we talk about like the biggest possible subjects, and it's like, well, I mean, if people want that, they go to Jon Stewart, don't they? They don't come to some random podcasters that they found. Like, so
Yeah.
we had our little sort of friends, and we certainly learned a lot about ourselves from that. But it was nice when you did get someone in chat, but it was also, it's hard to be present whilst also checking if someone's saying something. So I think it was almost a blessing that we didn't get too many people watching live. But it was nice to say hi to people when they did turn up. But it was still really a pre-recorded podcast. We just happened to record it. I got a nice backup of the video recording on Twitch as well as the local recording that we've done. So that just helped me feel a bit safer with the whole thing. Um,
No.
but I think if we had a bit more of a niche thing, and we're sort of working on that. We tried one Can You See My Screen podcast, where we've got a few episodes of that, but I think we haven't quite found the right thing yet. But yeah, I think you have to keep trying things out, don't you? And you learn, and in the process, even if you don't necessarily find that big audience, you're certainly solving a lot of technical problems, coming up with techniques for sort of learning about yourself, learning about the tools available, and gradually improving on that as you go, even if you don't necessarily get famous.
So that's cool. Lovely. Well, it's really lovely to hear from you, Michael. And so thanks for coming and having a chat with me today. I really appreciate it. So how can people find out a little bit more about you and what you do?
Well, just come to squares.tv, and I'm trying to, since the conference, I've managed to find a bit of clarity over, because I wanted to talk to people at the conference, and just because every single person I met through email was doing something different with my stuff, and I was like, what are the consistent themes that people want to do? And I've come up with those 7 that I mentioned earlier, and I'm starting to flesh those offerings out on the website. But basically, come to the website, join the newsletter, join the Discord, as well. And feel free to, if you are on iOS, if you are on a Mac, like I have this software that you can try out and use. And just feel free to email me, basically. So michael@squares.tv. I reply to everything. I have a whole system. It's actually got a bit intense this last couple of weeks because like people have really been interested in both my camera app and this new video pencil app, which lets you draw on top of your live feed, which there's a lot of excitement around. I think it's so stable and it's so useful that I think a lot of people are going to be wanting to use that. But yeah, just come and find me. And I'm on Twitter as well, @Michael Forrest. So yeah, that's me.
Great. Thank you, Michael Forrest, for joining us on the Influence Global podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That's it for another edition of Influence. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and give me your feedback, gordon@gordonglenister.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, where you can also ask me a question. If you're able to give us a 5-star review on any of the episodes, we really do appreciate it. And if you want help in creating an influencer marketing strategy, or you want to join the Influencer Marketing Secrets Roundtable weekly event, then head over to gordonglenister.com. If you want to find out more about the shows that we are on and others, go over to the MPN Marketing Podcast Network website and you can find them there. Thanks as always to my producer Neil Whiteside from Freedom One. And until next time, from me, Gordon Glenister, it's bye for now.